let me go ahead and introduce myself. I'm Miguel Ceballos, professor in sociology at Westchester University, and I want to spend a little bit of time talking about Mexican immigration. My area of research is immigration, my parents are Mexican immigrants. My dad is, my mom's side also, and so I'm interested in this. So what I wanted to do is actually begin just kind of having, where people talk about, answer these questions. I'm not used to this sort of thing here. And you kind of discuss, so maybe still before here, we can talk about this. First of all, I want to kind of get an idea, what do you think are the most common negative stereotypes today of Mexican immigrants and other immigrants from Latin America today? What do you think are the most common negative stereotypes and stereotypes about how you generalize about a particular group and say have the generalizations about everybody from that group? So what do you think are two of the most common?
They're poor and undereducated. That's what it is.
Okay.
I mean, I would say you hear all the time the criminalization, criminals.
The criminals, yeah. Okay. The criminals.
Well, and then again, I don't know if this is necessarily a stereotype, but that they're coming here because there's no economic, the economy is poor for them to be successful financially in Mexico, so that's one of the reasons why they're coming here to work.
Okay. So I guess
that is a stereotype, I guess, I'm not sure.
Well, yeah, you can assume that everybody who comes here is coming for that reason, who's come from Mexico, Latin America.
I couldn't see my teacher anywhere, and I was super confused. But I guess she's not here.
How about you? Do you have any ideas of what a common stereotype is of Mexican immigrants?
They actually said it earlier with being associated with criminals and whatnot, organizations.
Yeah, that's a big one. The criminals and they're violent, right? Mm-hmm. And so I was going. I can't word this very well, but I was going to show you some of the comments by Donald Trump.
And that's where a lot of it comes from.
And that he kind of promotes it, but these ideas kind of are not really new. But he kind of just the whole idea that Mexicans are rapists and they're criminals, and then those immigrants coming from Central America, the caravan, they're all drug criminals and stuff, right? They're dangerous, right? And so what I wanted to do is talk about how this is not something we're trying to understand it really in history, to understand why we have these ideas about Mexican immigrants and other Latin American immigrants. We have to understand history, and if we look at history of Mexican immigrants, it helps to understand how these ideas are not. I mean, they're really based in that kind of historical experience of Mexicans coming to the U.S. And you can think about how kind of history repeats itself, or it's just things stay the same even though they change a lot, right? And we can find these same ideas back in history. Just how we have these stereotypes of Mexicans or other immigrants, and specifically Latin American immigrants, for historical reasons, and try to understand why we have these stereotypes, what they serve. We could do that by understanding Mexican immigration. What are the other? How do I go back? So when did Mexican immigration begin to the United States? When do you think it began?
I guess after
large numbers.
I'll just take a guess. After the Mexican-American War.
At the Mexican War. Okay. Other ideas?
Civil War.
As a Civil War?
Well, during the Civil War, because I think one nation, while Civil War was happening, one nation went out and took Mexico right under them before America could really notice that.
Well, okay, so the history is actually a little after that, after the Civil War. In terms of, or before the Civil War, you had Mexican immigration, but Mexican-American War, before that happened, before the Civil War. But oftentimes people think about immigration the response to this oftentimes is that it began about the 1970s, and this massive migration. Maybe before then, but it goes back to
I wonder if the Mexican Revolution maybe caused a lot of immigration.
yeah, the 1910.
1910,
Yeah, so that was an important time too, the beginning of the last century. And then we go back to actually before that as well. And before we go further, what are some of the, what are the U.S. states that once we were part of Mexico? Mexico was part.
Oh, yeah, well, the whole
Which ones were there?
Southwest, Texas,
Texas.
Nevada, Arizona, California,
New Mexico.
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 Is that 5?
Florida, Colorado.
Colorado.
Yes.
Yeah.
I guess it might have been part of Oklahoma, maybe.
Oklahoma. Yeah. Yes. And
There was Louisiana had a lot of Mexico. I don't know it was part of
No,
it.
it was in Purchase.
Settlement. It was before.
that was separate.
No, but I meant there were New Orleans. Well, I guess it belonged to Spain.
France.
Yes. But
Yeah.
there's a large, anyway.
Oh, well, Spain with France. Before Mexico. So here's the. So this is the Republic of Mexico prior, to 1845, before the Mexican-American War began, and so the state. Well, after the Treaty of Guadalupe, right, in 1848, you have these are the states that. So that, these are the states that were once part of Mexico, okay, that they were ceded. They say ceded to the United States, essentially saying that they were given to the U.S., which was not really the case. But essentially, so there's 10 states that were once part of that are currently the U.S. states that were once part of Mexico, and so. And these are just not—they're just not barren lands. You had people here. They estimate about 10,000 people here at that time in 3 particular areas around Texas, New Mexico, and California. The populations: Los Angeles, San Francisco, Santa Fe, San Antonio, major centers of populations at that time. And so, it's not like it was just this barren land. And so these people were not immigrants to the U.S. They were here prior to the U.S. So the border really did cross those people who were here. And there are people still here, right, who their origins, we often say, well, we're all immigrants except the Native Americans. Well, not true for many Mexicans who are here, especially in parts of the Southwest. My own wife, her grandfather owned land in Texas, and we understand that actually they were there prior to the Mexican-American War. It was that far, which kind of keep its histories, and they lost it. It's basically taken away. A generation prior to my mother-in-law being born, and so there's this whole history that is forgotten, right? Or we don't realize that we have this population here that's been here, that was here for many, many years, and we assume that they're all the same. Basically, they're all immigrants, and they all have this history of coming to the U.S., wanting from the U.S. prior, usually around the 1970s or maybe the 50s even, but it has a longer history than that. But it actually began as soon as we had after the war, and one major migration flow began during the gold rush, and that was in 1849, the great gold rush, right? In California, we had after the 1848 the war, you had this mass migration of Anglos from the east to California to get gold in 1849. But what they found there were Mexicans in the field, in the gold mines. They had already began, migrating to California into gold mines prior to the 1849. They're called the 1848ers. There's this article we talked about that written by Sister Mary Colette Standard in the Southern California Quarterly in 1976. Talks about how you had this migration from Sonora, Mexico, into California for the gold mines. And why Sonora? Because you had mines there, silver mines. And so you had these experienced miners, Mexican miners, kind of going to go mine in the California gold fields. And so the Anglo 49ers, when they arrived, they're greeted by these not only Mexican gold miners, but Chinese as well. And so that creates a lot of stress between the two. And so similarly, it's just, you had this conflict that started erupting. So the earliest gold mines were found in Southern California near Los Angeles in about 1846, prior to the war. And then the other ones were found right after the war, which was over here in the Sierra Nevadas. And so when you had this migration to California, but also to Mexico, to Texas, you had this conflict between the two groups. The Anglos migrating to which was Mexico, and Mexicans that are already there. And so you had, you needed a justification to be able to take this land. Initially, what was the justification for taking away the land from Mexico to begin with? How did the U.S. justify the war? I mean, there was some justification about, well, they started something, but what was the general justification for taking this whole Southwest? Manifest destiny, it's ours. We should have, the U.S. should have it, this whole policy, manifest destiny, moving to the West. And those people who are here, well, the Indians, they didn't matter. And then the Mexicans, well, that was a country, right? And they said, well, they weren't doing anything with this country, with this land, this wonderful land. They were not progressive. They're not developing it. It was an agrarian society. And they're half Indian. And it's kind of like, well, they don't deserve to have this land. And so that just was justification for taking over, for the war, for taking over the land. So after the war, you had these Mexicans that they had to deal with, those that were already in these cities or in Texas that owned land. They were involved, they were mining. And so there was this conflict between the groups, and basically, so there was this they had to justify why they should be able to kind of keep this land. And so they had to justify why they were more deserving of whatever resources they were here, and justifying why, in case of the gold fields, we passed laws that would tax Chinese and tax Mexicans, and then they would also start, prohibiting them from getting gold, and they were pushed out of the gold mines. And so there were thousands that were migrating at that time from California, from Mexico into California. So migration began very, very early on in U.S. history, once after the Mexican-American War. Another event that occurred was the economic development in the Southwest. And so Mexicans, at the turn of the century, started migrating because there was a need for labor. Development in agriculture, in railroads, mining, just all development in the Southwest. It had already been occurring in the East Coast, but this is a new area that started developing. And so Mexicans were an important labor force, as were the Chinese. In addition, there was a Mexican Revolution, kind of the push force. So you have the push of the Mexican Revolution, Mexicans leaving, and then the pull of the economic development in that region. And so you see photos of Mexican workers in the railroads, men and women, Mexican men and women, and those involved in the economic development of the Southwest. And so migration between the U.S. and Mexico was very open. There was no real border there. People would come because there was jobs. They would come because there was family. They would come because, all of a sudden the border changed, and so what was once their home is kind of like, well, why can't I just go? And so it's people would go back and forth continually. So there's no real formal border, and that was not created until the 20s. Prior to that, people would, there was a border, but it was not really strictly enforced. My own uncle, he was actually my great uncle, my father's uncle. I remember visiting him. He was in a town called Zacatecas, Zacatecas, in the northern part of Mexico, and he was talking about how he migrated to Mexico, to the U.S. and California in I think it's about 1915, 1913, something like that. I can't exactly remember the date, the year. And he said that when he crossed, there was at Tijuana, at the border, there was a little puesto, a little house there for somebody to be. It was empty, nobody was there. There was just a little can, and you were supposed to put a little nickel in there. And so he'd go by with his ticle in there, and just keep on going. And there was not really enforced in terms of letting people come and go. And he didn't stay because he just was, he didn't enjoy it. He missed home. So he was there for a while, worked, and then he went back. He never returned. But it was very different, Mexican immigration at that time. It was very open. But still you have a good number of people coming. So you can see here, this is the average, the number of legal immigrants coming from Mexico from the 1900s to 2015. You see this increase at this time, at the early part of the century. So it was a significant number coming in. Not as much as it is today, but a significant number for that time. And they go into agriculture, a major place as well, where people were migrating to, where they were working in the fields. So there were many immigrants coming in, but they were not, also welcome. Right? They were not the only immigrants coming into the U.S. There was huge, European immigrants coming in in the East Coast. There was Japanese immigration at that time, Chinese prior to that, and so there was hearings about immigration in general, and also focusing on Mexican immigration. Concern about the number of Mexicans coming to the U.S. So there are congressional hearings, and here's examples, and here's the title of it: the temporary admissions of illiterate Mexican laborers, admission of Mexican agricultural laborers. So the focus was on Mexican immigrant laborers. They had other hearings about European immigrants, and so but there was also those Mexican immigrants as well. So they were seen as the Mexican problem. What do we do with all these Mexican immigrants coming in the U.S.? And so here's this article that talks about the perceptions of immigrants during the 1920s, to just show you how they understood who these immigrants are, and think about how we today with the stereotypes are of Mexican immigrants and immigrants from Latin America. Well, this is the stereotypes at that time, in the 1920s. And so here is, for example, an economist, Victor S. Clark, in 1908. He describes the Mexican as docile, patient, usually orderly in camp, fairly intelligent under competent supervision, obedient, and cheap. There's a representative from the Texas South Texas Cotton Growers Association. 12 years later, he says, "There's never been a more docile animal in the world than the Mexican." So there's this idea that they felt that Mexicans are just easy labor, docile. They're lazy, and so this is the general stereotype they had of Mexicans at the time. And here this Texas cotton grower says, in comparison, whites, he said, whites want more water and are troublemakers. But Mexicans are subservient, so they're easy to handle, and so that's why we want to keep them. And so, so these guys were advocating for Mexican immigration. They were supporting Mexican immigration because they're easy to manage. They were docile, right? They were, and they painted it as this in a very racialized way, as they're it's just the way they are. Okay? They're innately docile, innately lazy.
His attitude is even today.
Right, right. And so, exactly, and so it's, it's a different kind of, a different stereotype that's held, also still racialized. Thank you for coming. And so another example is, I'm a sociologist, and here's a very famous sociologist, Emery Bogardas. He says, unskilled Mexicans are, as a class, require supervision. Without someone directing them, they are likely to to take time off freely. They live so largely in the present that time there's no particular meaning to them. He says they are hacienda-minded. And this is from a sociologist's perspective, in terms of this culture of Mexicans. And so these are the different kind of views that they had of Mexicans at the time. And they were positive in the sense that they're the ones who wanted it, wanted them to come. Now, those who argued against Mexicans coming to continue Mexican migration, they had also racialized views. They'd say that Mexicans were Indians and mestizo, mixed race. And so there was a big concern about them mixing with whites here, white women in the U.S., changing the culture. They were described as low-grade Indians, talking about Mexican Indians in Mexico, who low-grade Indians who did not fight to extinction, but submitted and multiplied as serfs. So another sociologist from University of Texas describes him and says, Mexican, he has no social technique for handling partly colored races. So we can handle Negroes, but we can't handle Mexicans because they're mixed. And so that's even worse from this perspective. And so there's this whole descriptions they have of Mexicans in a very racialized way at this time in the 1920s, arguing why they should not allow them immigrating to the U.S. Really because they do not assimilate. They would basically pollute the culture, and because there's miscegenation, and that's not good. And if they continue to do that, they mix. And so that was a justification for not supporting it. The result is that actually they limited immigration from Europe but not from Mexico at the time, in spite of that, in spite of their efforts. So here's a sign showing that the Jim Crow laws apply to Mexicans as well, especially in Texas. In the South, well, even in California, you had Mexican schools. So this segregation existed for Mexicans as well. I was just speaking with somebody who grew up in Westchester, who was Puerto Rican, and I actually before this, there was a professor, an African American professor who grew up in Westchester, and she said that there was a school where the Burger King currently exists. Used to be
what?
Where the Burger King currently exists.
Oh, okay.
There was an elementary school there that used to be for, it was for African Americans, and so it was the segregation that existed back just in the '60s, obviously. And I was speaking to this other person who's Puerto Rican who grew up there, and he says, "Oh yeah, the Puerto Ricans went there too. All the minorities went to this school there in Westchester at the time. They demolished it, replaced it with Burger King, but did that history. So you imagine early in the 1900s, you had a similar sort of segregation having applied to Mexicans. So it's seen as a racialized, they were seen as a different racial group. Here is the U.S. Census in 1930. And if you look really closely, here's the different, look really closely, this is right here. I took a copy of this over here, and it shows personal identification, color of race, and the choices are white, Negro, Mexican, Indian, Chinese, Japanese, Filipino, maybe that was something else. And so Mexican was seen as a separate race at that time. And it followed, these ideas you saw in the 20s during that hearing. And here is the instructions for the census in terms of how you define, because at that time, the enumerator was the one who decided what race to select. The person didn't choose, right? And so the instructions are for each of these groups, and here's how you decide somebody who is Mexican to categorize them in a particular racial group. And so it was very racialized at that time. So there was a reason for that, right? To make sure to set them apart, to justify why we should prevent them from immigrating or any sort of conflicts that occur between them, between groups over economic or political power. So race was that justification for this group as well, for Mexicans. The result. Well, one was the passage. This is the National Origins Act that was passed in 1924 that prevented or limited Eastern and Southern European immigrants from coming to the U.S. Then in the 30s, you saw this because Mexicans were not excluded. You still had Mexican immigrants coming in, working in the 1930s and the Great Depression. There was a mass deportation of Mexicans from the U.S. So they were rounded up and deported, back to Mexico. Although they estimate about, and the estimate varies. There was a recent study that came out that estimated maybe, almost a million or something were immigrated. But I don't think that was the case. I mean, the conservative estimate is about 300,000 were deported, and of them, about a third or more were Mexican Americans who were born here. And so they were just, at this time, they just rounded them up. They didn't ask, for your papers. They just took it, if you were in a park or wherever were congregating, they rounded up and deported you. My mother grew up in Los Angeles at that time, and she recalls, neighbors kind of being afraid, people being afraid to leave during on Sunday to go to the placita to the park, where people congregate, and some neighbors, she said, the family members just kind of disappeared. They didn't know what happened. They got caught up in these roundups, and so. So this is nothing. Kind of like history kind of is kind of repeating itself in many respects, and even if it's just at the conservative level, if it was 300,000, a percentage of that population at that time of Mexicans, it's quite significant. So today's numbers probably a million or so.
Where's Chihuahua City at?
Chihuahua City, that's just, Chihuahua is just the state just south of Texas, the Texas border. So Chihuahua City, I'm not really sure exactly its location, but that's north of Mexico.
So this is leaving the United States to go to Mexico?
Right.
Oh, okay. Okay, so Chihuahua City is not in Mexico, it's in the United States.
No, this isn't Chihuahua. So they were,
I'm confused. These people are being moved from the U.S. to Mexico?
so I guess this photo really shows either they've been dropped off and the train is leaving, or they're even taking them further into Mexico. They've been dropped off and heading back. Many were just dropped off in Mexico, just even though they have a family there, they had to figure out a way to get back. But times changed, and one thing that changed was the war. in 1942. Because of the war, there was a labor shortage in the U.S. So you had this need for labor, and Mexico was close by. Of course, the U.S. Made an agreement with Mexico to create this guest worker program called the Bracero program. And it offered permanent status to those workers coming to the U.S. as well in the process. And it was quite successful in terms of bringing all these workers coming into the U.S. Providing them labor, especially in agriculture, but in other areas as well. My own father was a bracero, came in the 40s with this program. And Mexico, that had more leverage at the time because the U.S. needed the labor and force, and so Mexico actually, as part of this agreement, was able to provide protections for those workers, and so they would not allow them to displace other workers in the U.S. But they also prevented them from going to particular states that had where Mexicans experienced a lot of discrimination, like Texas. So Texas and 8 other states were excluded from this agreement because there was this history in terms of how they treated Mexicans in the U.S. But Texas is a huge agricultural state, right? They needed workers. And so what Texas did as a state, they just opened up the borders, to let all the Mexicans in. And so you have this very kind of contrary to what we're accustomed to today, right? Because Mexico wouldn't allow the federal program to operate in Texas. Texas just opened the border. There are other times when Congress did that as well. They unilaterally opened the border because they couldn't come to an agreement with Mexico on this program, but they needed workers. And so they allowed all these immigrants coming in, Mexican immigrants. There's an estimated, these are the numbers that those workers that signed up with the program during this time, but there's others who came in without papers through Texas, or at the times when Congress would open up the borders unilaterally. And so they estimate that about 5 million entered between 1847 and 1846. It was so successful for agriculture especially that they continued the program after past the war until 1964. There was a large undocumented immigration during this time, late 40s, early 50s, and there was disputes between the U.S. and Mexico over this agreement, and so we had these incidents where the U.S. would open up the border, I say, in order to allow Mexican immigrants to come in, in spite of Mexico saying, no, we don't agree with this kind of program. And so you have images like this here at the Mexican border, where you have all these Mexicans amassed trying to come into the U.S., and it's Mexican customs, border agents trying to stop them from entering the U.S., and U.S. officials trying to encourage them to come into the U.S. And so you can pull them in, and then once they're on U.S. soil, then they're fine, they're free, right? And so this is really kind of opposite from today, right? Because of the economic need, right? So that was motivating these ideas about the necessity for immigrants, Mexican immigrants. It was finally terminated in 1964 as a result of abuse and low wages of workers and the undermining of farm worker unionization. But it took that long for it to be terminated because of value by our agriculture, especially. Interesting note is that in the 50s, there was, as mentioned, there was a large undocumented immigration at that time, and so the public was really opposed to this, these undocumented. There was real concern about affecting the economy, and you had that federal program, what was it called, Operation Wetback. That's what was the term, the federal program. And Trump, mentioned that, kind of get, we should go back to Operation Wetback and throw them all out, all the Mexicans. Well, what happened at that time is that Eisenhower, passed this legislation or passed this executive order, whatever it was, a policy, but agribusiness needed those workers. And so what they do is they round up these workers, they take them to the border, have them cross over, and then return, and then sign up officially. So they no longer be illegal. And they looked at it in mass because they needed those workers. And so this problem was solved. You got rid of illegal immigration because they're all legalized. This is in the 1950s because there was an economic need in agribusiness.
I mean, there's still a need out, I assume.
Yeah.
Today. So what's happening now?
So today, there's a lot of deportation of Mexican immigrants and those who are undocumented, and even some who are documented. And so you have some agribusinesses kind of losing labor. They're unable to kind of continue. There's this problem because the border, they're so strict at the border to prevent people from coming over, and you can't. And Trump's not allowing any sort of legalization to go on at all, and so you can't even replace these workers who are being deported.
Piggyback on that, I mean, what is the status of the temporary work visas? I had heard like 15 years ago, it was like out of control for American demand and the number. I actually knew somebody who was from the Spanish-speaking country originally and had, in fact, some of my student families were there, but they could go back and forth legally, but for a year, and then it had to be renewed, and he would renew every year.
Right.
He said it got to the point he'd be paid, it would cost him $8,000 to get his crew, but he was willing to do everything legally.
Really?
He couldn't get the visas. He said he would go to call up, and he was self-employed, so he had to be out on that. The visas were all gone by the time when it came out in the window. They had somebody in the corporation just waiting there, calling in, and then the visas were gone. Yes.
I don't know. I know that I don't know what's going on with that temporary visa.
But that was the type of thing, like an agricultural.
Because Trump,
landscaping,
last year, didn't he just he wanted to eliminate the temporary visa program, and so he did, or to some degree. I don't know. I don't know the status of that. Yeah. So, and this talks to your point also. If you look at the current trends. So here is the current trends right now. And this is what kind of motivating my concern. You have this mass increase in migration of immigrants. But the thing is that this is really misleading. These are large numbers coming in. These are just numbers, right? But the U.S. has changed over time in terms of numbers. So you really cannot compare today's world with 100 years ago because of the different size of the country, different population size. And so it's better if if we compare it by percentages instead of by numbers. So this is, we have over 317 million today, and back then it was 23 million in 1850. But if we compare the percentages, they're not that far off in terms of percentage of immigrants in the country, right? And so here, if you look at this blue line is the actual numbers, and here's the percentages of immigrants in the U.S., percentage of foreign-born. And so it shows that today we're reaching what the way things were for about 80 years, 70 or 80 years in the United States in terms of percentage of immigrants in the country, right? And so today we're using this scare tactic of and all these immigrants coming in, this nativist ideas, right? That are saying, you know, this is a crisis, but you know, it's not. It wasn't. This is the way things were in the past. Just these have changed in recent years in terms of numbers of or percentage of immigrants in the country due to these changes in policies, and there's been a little change in terms of who is immigrating to the U.S. The newest immigrants are more and more Asian as compared to the past, as opposed to Hispanics. But that's not the perception that is being promoted, right? The dangerous ones are coming from Latin America, right? There's this interview, I don't know if you've heard it, with Jorge Ramos, who's from Univision, very famous journalist, Mexican American, and Coulter, conservative. You see it inside, and her basic message is that this kind of racialized idea of Mexicans are, and she's talking about Mexicans are.
Was it the Shia with the guy that was a nationalist with the hate crime or something? There was another interview that he did with a gentleman who represented some kind of hate crime group or something like that.
Yeah, I don't know.
This is a woman here?
This is a woman.
I don't see that one.
And culture. And I don't know how to turn on the sound, but you can turn it on.
Yeah.
I can't figure it. I can turn it on, but one of these two work.
I think.
Oh, there he goes. Or maybe it's because I don't have access or something. Because you need to be a teacher to get access to websites. Other website? Page block. Yeah.
Try.
Let me try. See what happens. But she made this statement about you had to be comparing Mexican immigrants to ISIS, basically. She said Mexican immigrants are even more dangerous than ISIS, the terrorists, basically. And the problem is their culture. This is their ideas, and she's a strong Trump supporter.
It's not going to work.
It's not gonna work. Yeah. Yeah. So it just shows us these racialized ideas still exist today, but it's just taken a different form with the same purpose of kind of justifying why, in this case, why we want to allow immigrants to come into the U.S. when they come in. They're a danger. Before they were lazy, right? But there was something wrong with culture, or their very racialized view. And so this again has not changed, and you can have all kinds of things coming from what comments Trump has made to show this to be the case. So here is perceptions people have of immigrants in general, right? Do they contribute to crime? A large percentage say yes. This is a national sample, national survey that was conducted. Didn't get the date, but it was in 2006, something like that. But it hasn't changed. So this is the perception, right? But the reality is, if you look at violent crime rate across the country, it's changed. It's been reduced. It's been declining. We call that increase in immigration. While here, this orange or brown line is violent crime in California from the 1960s to 2005, and this dotted line is U.S. violent crime rate. And so you see this increase slowly back and forth, and then from here, it's been a continued decrease in violent crime rates. So if immigration is contributing to increasing crime rate, then you'd have to see an increase in crime rate. But we don't see that yet.
I mean, is that a generalization that every country feels about their immigration or immigration?
Say it again.
Well, I mean, is that a generalization, so if if I'm in France, I mean, is that the general, I mean, do you think that's a general feeling that French people think of immigrants coming into France as well?
This nativist idea, or
Yes.
they're dangerous.
Right.
I'm not really sure what the justification, if they're saying they're causing crime, or
Right.
what the problems are, taking jobs away, or what it is, or it's a culture. In the case of Europe, there's different reasons. Right now, this is very prominent in the U.S. in terms of this crime that Trump is taking hold of. But there's other ideas that you hear about the culture. Like this culture talks about that. This culture, we can't allow them to immigrate.
When was that poll taken?
So that was taken 2006 or something like that. So
Okay.
it's a little.
That's interesting, because it was actually before.
Yeah.
Okay,
Before,
yeah.
Well before Trump, right?
Yeah.
And so this idea, the ideas are just getting stronger.
Mhm.
Here is more recent data coming from the New York Times, which just came out, showing the percentage increase in the immigrant population from 1980 to 2015, or 16, you can read it. And here is the percentage of violent increase and then decrease over time. So again, you have this decline in violent crime. But while you have an increase in immigration, it doesn't match, because you have to have, one causes the other, then it has to increase. You have to have an increase in immigration, you don't. Okay. Here is another study that looks at cities in California. And these are cities, and it shows here, these cities that are along this line here have a higher percentage of immigrants. And here is the change in violent crimes. And so it's showing that basically this line shows that those cities that have higher immigration, or foreign-born rather, born populations have lower crime rates. So again, it doesn't match this idea about immigrants contributing to crime, because you expect cities that have high levels of high proportions of immigrants that they should also have high levels of crime, but you don't find that. This example here in California. Here's another one that just came out that shows other cities as well. And these are the dots represent cities: New York, Miami, and so these are have higher percentage of immigrants, and then here is higher crime and less crime. So you have most cities that have higher levels of more immigrants have lower crime. So in fact, the more immigrants you have, the less crime you have. So it doesn't really follow. This is national. The other one was California. And here's the recent FBI statistics that came out looking at particular cities. So where are the most safest places in the country? The 10 safest places, dangerous. So these are the 10 safest metro cities in 2018, based on that study. They're all along near the border, safest places. So again, you expect them to be more dangerous, right? You talk about how dangerous Mexico is, how those drug wars are going on down there, and so you don't find that unsafeness here in the US. This is from FBI that data. So here's a list. You can see it. So this is a list ranking from 1 to 10, the top 10 safest cities. Close to the border: Anaheim in LA, San Jose, that's in Northern California, San Diego, El Paso, Austin, Mesa, Arizona. And then the 10 most dangerous, none of them are near the border. Detroit, St. Louis, Memphis, Baltimore, Kansas City. Closest one is Stockton in Northern California. So it doesn't, again, follow that narrative of these immigrants being dangerous. Now here's some, a study, well, this is a report from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which is not very, not a radical, group in any respect. And they talk about the myths and facts of immigrants. And here, one of their myths and facts of the immigrants. The myth is that immigrants are more like a crime to native-born Americans. In fact, immigration does not cause crime to rise, and immigrants actually less likely to commit crimes. will be behind bars than native-born Americans. There's other studies that show that. They look at those who are incarcerated and find that immigrants are less likely to be incarcerated than U.S.-born Americans, native-born Americans. Other myths and facts, these stereotypes, right? Immigrants drive down wages of American workers. They say in this factor that immigrants give a slight boost to average wages of Americans by decreasing their productivity and stimulating investment. Here is back to your earlier question, an article came out, this is 2017, showing in the fields there, these California farmers who supported Trump are losing their workers. They're fearful of what's happening because they're going to lose their workforce and not be able to replace it, and so they're not going to be able to be productive themselves. So this is California. There's other similar stories in other parts of the country, especially in agriculture. So other kind of stereotypes based on these myths. We find out immigrants in general. Immigrants hurt the communities that are struggling economically. Immigrants have economically revitalized many communities throughout the country. And undocumented immigrants do not pay taxes. They actually pay billions of taxes each year. And this is all from the Chamber of Commerce, U.S. Chamber of Commerce. But I wanted to end with this article that came out in the New York Times about Kennett Square. You know how how the Mexican immigration has revitalized and contributed to the revitalization of Kennett Square, and it's true for other towns in Pennsylvania and across the country. And so it really goes contrary to the stereotypes that's used. Sorry?
What's happening here in Norristown?
In Norristown too.
A lot of the businesses in Norristown. A lot safer than this.
Oh really? Yeah. That's interesting. It'd be interesting to kind of get some data on that. So, thank you.
That article came out in June 2018?
Yeah, it just came out. Some months ago.
Was that New York Times?
New York Times. June 2nd, 2018. Yeah, talking about Kennett Square. In other countries too. Other towns rather, but they focus on Kennett. So U.S. Yeah.
It's interesting, I mean, leaving the whole percentage of the population immigration, that's very revealing. Compared to 1850.
Yeah, right.
And today, of course, we have the numbers of people coming from Asia, et cetera, and it really isn't that much greater percentage of the total population.
Right. Yeah, and it's really because in 1924 the passage of that law limiting European immigrants. That's why you don't have European immigration. You don't have a lot of European immigrants until much later, more recently, because there was these laws preventing.
After World War II.
In 1964, they passed a law to allow to change that previous 1924 law. Yeah, and that's the law also. You kind of allowing family reunification, sort of thing. That's something that Trump is targeted as well. Yeah. But yeah, so the percentage we have today is really kind of that's been the norm in our U.S. history than anything. But it's these stereotypes that are used to justify kind of keeping justify the nativism, keeping people out, and basing it on race. They are culturally, biologically inferior, so that's why we should not allow them to come here. They're dangerous.
It's funny, I was talking about when I was in the school district here, I go there, and yes, I talked to parents about fourth grade education, but I was shocked a few times. I had undocumented parents who've been in universities in Mexico.
Yeah.
And they said, we just can't get jobs in our field.
Yeah.
So we're coming here and for our children and this and that. But various times, people who had higher ends, higher levels of education, who are in the same undocumented situation.
Right. Yeah, so many of them come and they're working in unskilled labor type of jobs because they can't get.
Well, some of them can get started with whether they have business background, training, or
Yeah.
whatever. But I remember one couple in particular, and I can't remember the exact career that they had studied, but it wasn't a practical type of career. And they said, it's so limited in Mexico, it's just so totally limited.
Yeah, it's hard.
So they came here in an undocumented situation.
Oh,
from their
yeah.
behavior. So that was very revealing.
Yeah.
Various times.
Yeah, it is. It's sad. But yeah, so it just there's lots of things going on and with different policies that are being advocated by Trump. So it's hard to keep up. It's just great.
Who knows where it's going? I guess the change in Congress will make it more difficult to do drastic things. Let's
Right.
put it that way.
Yeah, that's. I hope.
I guess getting an immigration bill of some sort passes someday. They're trying to.
Yeah.
And one thing, I was at a migrant ed conference in about 2010, for Pennsylvania,
Yeah.
and the speaker said, in 2000, it was McCain and, of all people, Orrin Hatch, who were sponsoring a realistic immigration. This is crazy, and it was the Republican.
Yeah.
It was the Republicans who
Yeah.
were pushing forward that we have to do something to make our situation. And then 2001, we had the towers come down.
Right,
And
right.
it's been just going all the way the other way.
Yeah, I had
Since then.
a colleague. I remember when that happened, and years later, after all of that, kind of what to do about the 9/11.
Yeah.
The only thing that concrete they came up with was the border, stop the Mexicans from coming in. Everything of all the stuff they do, that's the thing that they focus on, the border. Nothing else that they can come to agreement to stop potential, another 9/11 from happening. And so it feeds right into these ideas, like what's your name? Talk about, they're worse than the terrorists. And that's what Trump was saying, the same thing.
I don't see
terrorists
how,
coming in.
I don't see how many. You have to be quite a deep agent that I was a terrorist. And that I caravan and go through.
Yeah.
I don't speak Spanish and everything.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
Right. Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
for taking the time.
Very, very, very
Really nice.
Good.